When I was 13, like many other 13-year-olds, I got into quite a bit of trouble. I had a loud mouth and purple hair and a tendency to talk back to my parents. Unlike many other 13-year-olds, my rebelliousness landed me in boarding school. The boarding school I went to went under the name Wisconsin Academy. Although ambiguous, the ambiguity hid the actual program, which was meant to be a religious reformative experience for parents struggling with misbehaved teens. This reformative school is not unlike many others. By subjecting its students to physical and mental exhaustion, they are able to effectively and negatively impact the adolescents of America. According to Dr. Heather Mooney, there are between 50 and 100,000 teenagers being subjected to programs like the one I attended. The methods being used to reform these students and their effects need to be brought into the light so that survivors can find healing and people like you can spread awareness in order to reform these reform schools. According to Britannica, some methods of brainwashing include isolation, physical and psychological punishment, as well as an exacting regimen. These were all a part of the curriculum I attended, but were disguised as religious doctrine. It is not uncommon for reform schools to have religious or spiritual affiliation in order to do so. As a student in their program, I was forced to be a vegetarian. According to them, this is in order to avoid unclean foods, and it may not seem to be an extreme or physical punishment, but limiting protein intake with no or little substitution can negatively impact personal inhibitions. Cults often replace proteins with carbs, so followers become more susceptible to extreme teachings. In my case, meat was substituted with wheat gluten, which is not only extremely unhealthy, but has no protein. Diets like these are often paired with physical exertion. On Havenwood Academy's website, a reform school for girls, they call this outdoor adventure therapy. At my school, outdoor adventure therapy was waking up before the sunrise to run laps and drills in a poorly lit gym until breakfast started. Physical exertion was not only used to tire the students, but also to punish them and account for them. If your behavior was bad enough, they would lock you alone in a dorm room with no room to move or exercise your body. And if you were good, you got the privilege of getting a manual labor job on campus. The more time they filled, the more exhausted you became and the more vulnerable you were. By far the worst method of brainwashing used in reformative schools is isolation. I mentioned before that the students at my school were punished by being locked in a dorm, but this is not isolated to my alma mater. Students were also denied the privilege of personal phones, and the phone privileges that were allowed were observed and heavily restricted. This limits students from receiving outside opinions, perspectives, teaching, and love. Isolation means identity and thought and affection are all found within the institution itself. According to the American Psychology Association, victims of social isolation are not only at a higher risk for mental health illnesses like depression and anxiety, but also face a higher risk of premature mortality. Brainwashing or thought reform are also a leading cause for dissociative disorders that impact one's memory and ability to create independent identity and make independent decisions. Teenagers are especially susceptible to the effects of these methods because their minds and identities are developing. No teenager, misbehaved or not, should face the abuse of reformative boarding schools. Physical exertion, mental manipulation, and isolation only lead to negative effects. And these negative effects are not worth any good behavioral outcome. Let's reform these reform schools by spreading awareness and speaking out.